Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone has had a good Wednesday and good to see some familiar faces from our first couple of sessions. Good to see some new faces tonight. And we're honored to have you here as we're going to jump into week number 3 of our 6 weeks to a new marriage. So I'm going to do a brief recap for those that may have not been able to be with us the first 2 sessions. So as we kick things off during session 1, we talked about this idea of usness, right? So in any marriage, we maintain our unique individualism, but then when we come together in marriage, this beautiful thing happens where there's something unique about our couple experience, right? And so Terry talked about just as we have kids, and kids have unique DNA from each person and then unique personality traits, they often also then have something special and unique that God gave them, right? And the same is true for our marriage. So we go into marriage and we create usness. And so usness is like this creation that's part me, part you, and then part uniqueness that God creates. And it really draws out, when it's done well, it really draws out the best of who we can be, right? I sometimes joke that, there's the passage, iron sharpens iron, or we wind up in a bloodbath, metaphorically, right? So we want to create the kinds of relationships where usness, right, the best of us are able to come forth. But unfortunately, because we live in a broken, fallen world, none of us are immune to a pain cycle, right? And so last week we introduced this theme that we're going to carry forward and go a little deeper with tonight, the pain cycle. So the pain cycle in any relationship, if we have a violation of love or trust, which are like the 2 pillars of a healthy relationship, it draws out the worst of us, right? When we are in pain, we tend to cope with that pain in different ways by thinking and feeling negative things. And then when we think and feel negative things, what tends to happen in our behavior? We tend to cope by doing negative things. So one of the things we got to do to build a really healthy relationship is have a lot of self-awareness. What happens when I'm in pain? When my pain cycle gets activated, and we'll move to the next slide here. Yeah, when our pain cycle gets activated, our human nature is we kind of get tunnel vision, and we sort of focus on what our spouse may be doing to really annoy us, to really frustrate us. And sometimes we'll even attach negative motives. Well, they're doing that because they don't love me or respect me or value me. We kind of get that tunnel vision, and that's really just a product of our humanity getting activated. When our pain is activated, we feel negative things, we think negative things, and we do negative things. And then that really sets up this negative reinforcement process. Hurt people. And when we're in pain, then we just kind of pay it forward, and this really negative thing happens. So one of the things we want to do, we want to think about when our pain cycle gets activated, is we have to kind of slow down just jumping to all of the negative conclusions and really understand this. My spouse is not the enemy, even though it might feel like it in this moment. This person I'm in contact with, they're not ultimately the enemy. Their pain is activated. My pain is activated. We almost have to depersonalize some of our pain, right? And then focus on some different internal messages. In fact, where the series is going to shift in sessions 4 and 5 is sort of like the healthy opposite, the antidote to pain. We're going to get into our peace cycles and talk about how do we regulate when we're distressed. So tonight we're going to carry this forward and actually share a few more practical examples. Lauren is going to talk a little bit about her pain cycle. The DVD is going to talk a little bit about that pain cycle in a couple. And so then that'll be an invitation for you guys to go a little bit deeper and thinking through, what is my pain cycle? And then how does this manifest whenever I'm in conflict with other people? Let's go to the next slide. So a passage here, one of the things I love in a lot of the New Testament writings is the author will sort of describe like this dichotomy of once you thought this way, once you acted this way, but now in your identity in Christ, there's been some type of transformation that's happened. And I thought this really fits well with this theme of pain cycle or peace cycle. When we're in our pain cycle, our humanity, our sin nature really comes to the surface, doesn't it? So in this passage, it talks about putting off our old self where we're corrupted by deceitful desires. And that in peace, what happens? We're able then to pursue holiness. We're able to put on this new self. So it's almost like the pain cycle is sort of the outcome of sin in our life, and the peace cycle is like, What does renewal in our identity in Christ look like? And then which of those am I living out of? Because none of us are free from pain and suffering in this life. It's usually what is our response to the pain and suffering. And when our humanity gets involved, our pain cycle gets activated, it's going to draw out of us the kinds of words and actions that just perpetuate conflict. And part of our identity in Christ allows us to do what? Not ignore or forget about our pain, but process it different internally. And then out of our wholeness, do what? Actually pursue connection. And so as we transition into the peace cycle, we'll have more practical ways of how do we regulate this distress, and then what can this look like in changing how we do our relationships together.
Welcome back, everybody. Wow, last week, just thinking about all of the stuff from the past, the way it created those hot buttons, and then the way I coped to protect myself, and how much damage that's done in my marriage. But the realization that understanding that, just understanding that has a lot of power. It's like when you take something that's been in the dark for so long, when something's in the dark, the enemy has control over that. It says he's in charge of the dark. And just dragging something into the light, just exposing it and saying, okay, I'm going to label this, I'm going to name it, I'm going to start to understand what causes me to act the way I do, the way I don't want to necessarily act, but I haven't been able to stop. Dragging that into the light now exposes it to the person, the God that's in charge of the light. And so we're at a cool place where you're starting to understand kind of what happens and the pain that causes for you and for your relationship. And today is going to be a good day because we're going to get even more practical. And if you haven't already, it's going to be a chance for you to kind of see what your conflicts look like up on the board. And we're going to get a chance with one of you right here in the room to do that.
So we really want to get to the heart of the issue of what drives things in the relationship when they don't go so well. And so if we get to the heart of that, then we're really going to have that plus and really going to be able to have a powerful tool to combat the enemy. So Matt and Amy have volunteered to help us with kind of going through one of these cycles so that we can get a clear idea of what this looks like. So Amy, we're going to start with you. If you look at that exercise 1, what are some of those words that you picked out on that list that made sense to you?
Defective, discouraged, not measuring up, and disconnected.
Okay, all right. So when you and Matt have an argument, do any of those words sound familiar or a little bit more familiar than others?
Yeah, I think probably I feel like there's something I have caused to create this kind of situation. That's probably why like defective stood out so much to me, is that I've done something to cause this.
Right.
Sure.
That's a real common feeling then, of feeling like there's something wrong with me and something wrong with the identity that I carry because I'm responsible for this argument, or I didn't do something to keep us out of this argument. Right. Yeah, it's a real common thing. What other words there? By the way, that's a real process, a real shaming word that says there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, I noticed that from the last week's teaching. Let's see, probably discouraged because I want to do my best as a wife and please him. And when if a conflict has come up, then I feel like, oh, well, I've made a mistake. And so I feel discouraged about that. Kind of almost sounds like performance almost, but...
Right,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, again, that's pointing it toward yourself and saying, there's something lacking in me, or I didn't perform the way that I should have, and I'm the reason that the relationship is kind of going off in this direction. Right. Yeah. Any other,
not
what's
measuring up? Like, there is, there's like something that he desires in life or in the marriage, and if a conflict comes up, then I'm not measuring up to that thing that he desires. That there's something else I need to work on so that I can give him something better.
Yeah. So you can kind of see on Amy's top 3 there of what she feels. How, just as a question, do you remember having these feelings growing up or in other situations besides just being in conflict with Matt?
I think probably the main place I remember that is in a relationship I had in high school.
Mm-hmm.
It was a dating relationship that was not healthy, and it was long, and that really was the first place I encountered like a negative interpretation of who I was.
Yeah.
Or what my actions were, or my desires, or anything like that. That was the first time, and I think that it's probably where most of that has been from.
So it was a relationship that likely was about putting you down.
Oh, yeah. And there were times of not being put down, but probably on a consistent basis having, that type of conflict.
Yeah, it's an excellent example that, that these messages can come from a variety of places, but they're nonetheless powerful messages that you still carry around with you. Yeah. Well, tell me, what is it that you normally do when you feel that deep sense of that there's something wrong with you, defective, discouraged, that you don't measure up?
Well, I mean, I like peace, and so I try to fix it. I try to find the right way, or I try to redeem myself, or I try to learn how to best fit him or suit him, or even a friendship or a situation. And so probably being a fixer.
Yeah.
I don't like conflict. I mean, I'll have conflict if we need to hash some things out, but I don't like unnecessary conflict. I really enjoy the peaceful relationship, and
So if you feel these things then on that exercise 1, what is it that you cope on that exercise 3? What are some of those things that you utilized? You're really active around this.
Yeah, I wrote down getting whiny and needy, and performing, and I wrote down blaming others, because I think I do that some, because if the problem needs to be fixed, and then I just find someone to blame sometimes. If I'm not to blame, then the blame has to go somewhere.
Right.
And so I want to resolve it and put the blame somewhere.
Right.
So
right. How often, what were the 3 again?
Blaming others, perform, and whiny and needy.
And which one of those do you feel like is something that you always do? When you're having these feelings, is there one of those 3 that you always do?
Probably perform.
You always try to perform your way out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you feel like there's something about you that's lacking.
Right.
Yeah, and then...
But I think the second one's whiny and needy. Because I just want affirmation. If I'm feeling like I don't want to measure up, then I'm just wanting some affirmation of can you tell me that at least I'm doing one of the things good, or...
Does it work?
Maybe for temporary.
Yeah.
Just for a minute. And then it's because there's a relief, and then I'm like, ooh, I still feel yucky.
Yeah. That's the problem with being a shamer, is that, and a performer, is that when you try to perform your way out of shame, you're only as good as your last performance. And so even if you got positive feedback, it has a tendency to come back on you and say, well, but I didn't do well this time, or there's something else.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't usually have outbursts, but inside it helps me to come to peace if I can put blame somewhere. If I don't have to carry it around, then if I can put it somewhere, then I'll be at peace with it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. Matt, as you look at what I've put down here as what Amy feels and how she copes, does that look familiar to you? Is that what you, especially in terms of what you see her do?
Yes, but externally she doesn't blame people. external. She takes it on the chin, and she'll wear it herself.
Yeah. So she may be blaming people, but she does that in an internal process.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do see her, her coping mechanism is to perform. So if there's any kind of, hey, how about this? She immediately will take it as her responsibility that she somehow failed, and okay, now let me come back over the top, even if that's not in our relationship, yes, but even in the context of her girlfriends and the relationships in her life, I see that she wants to step in there and do that. So yeah, I think that
makes a lot of sense then. Right. Okay, well, Matt, as you look at exercise 1, what are some of those words that you circled on about how you feel, particularly when you get in conflict with Amy?
Disrespected, devalued, and inadequate are the 3 that I circled.
Disrespected, devalued,
and inadequate.
Okay, good. Yeah, and those are kind of reflective of both those kind of feelings of violation of love and trust, not knowing if things are safe or not knowing your identity of where you stand. What of those feeling words, which seems to be the most powerful for you?
Definitely disrespected.
Yeah. What would you see as the second most common word there?
Oh, probably devalued.
Like you're not as important to Amy, or just in general that there's something.
I think probably because it's so closely linked to the disrespected thing, and feeling like your opinions, your thoughts, your positions are not as weighty as what they maybe should be or could be.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So those two go together with you. It sounds like you really, when you're feeling this, you're really feeling a loss of sense of who you are when you get into those conflicts. And then the final one is feeling unappreciated? Inadequate. Yeah. And so that fits all 3 of these. Inadequate, devalued, and disrespected really fit with the whole idea of really struggling to say, do I feel, that I am loved and safe and secure in this relationship? Makes a lot of sense. So Matt, when you're having these feelings of feeling devalued, disrespected, inadequate, do you remember the first time you had those feelings, or do you remember having those feelings in a different situation besides with just Amy?
Yeah, back to probably junior high school, as far back as junior high school, maybe even on some level in elementary, but particularly in junior high, and definitely struggled pretty intense with this stuff in high school.
So it's a story that you remember these feelings being activated long before you met Amy.
Oh yes. Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. That's how it is with almost all of us, is we carry these feelings around either from the families that we grew up in, or school situations, or important relationships. It's very common. Well, what is it, when you look at exercise 3 then, what are some of those things that you find yourself doing when you have these feelings? What do you normally find yourself coping? How do you find yourself coping?
Defensive, whiny, needy, blame others, and arrogant.
Yeah. So whiny, needy, defensive, arrogant, blaming others. Yeah. What would you say is an automatic turn to? In other words, most often when you feel disrespected, what's an automatic that you go to?
Probably defensive. What do you think?
Either that or arrogant.
Yeah.
I love you.
I'll take that as a tie. So defensive or arrogant. And then secondary ones, blaming.
Blame others and whiny needy.
Okay. So most of these relate to that sector that we're talking about, that you really question your identity, and so you respond out of either blaming or shaming behaviors of yourself, which makes perfect sense. You probably do those somewhat in an alternating style. But there's also this sense that you do have this defensive behavior that usually fits with controllers too, that are trying to take control of the situation and improve their lives and make things different. Yeah. Well, Amy, when you look at this in terms of how Matt describes the way he feels and how he copes, does that look familiar to you or consistent with the Matt that you know?
Yeah, it does. And I think just kind of clicked when you said that couples don't fight over 20, 30, or 40 things. They fight over, one thing multiple times. It's seeing that when we have had conflict, it's because he feels disrespected in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just has clicked, and so I absolutely see that.
So, Amy and Matt, as you look at this, if you look at how you feel and then the coping behaviors that both of you have chosen, do you remember coping in the ways that you have up here that pre-existed the relationship with one another? Were you coping in the same ways before you were married? Do you remember situations?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was being a young man more times than not in an older man's world. Being the youngest guy in most environments and trying to prove who I was to the older generation, and having older men in business or otherwise kind of go, well, one day you'll know something.
Right.
And the feeling of being disrespected and feeling like there was an outside chance that I knew more than he did.
Right.
Even at a younger age.
And that really stimulated this behavior,
Yes.
really defensive about who you were and really standing up for yourself, and I can do that. And
That's right.
yeah. How about you, Amy?
Yes, especially like when I said a high school relationship that had started.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably when those kinds of behavior patterns began, I think, and probably with just friendships and things like that, like maybe the whiny and neediness to like fish for approval from friends and things like that in a real subtle way, but I knew what I was trying to satisfy inside.
Yeah,
by
you
doing
and
that.
you and I are alike, that we're both shamers. We know how to go trolling for those compliments in a way that makes, make me feel better, make me feel better. It's very common. Yeah, and this is the one thing that we want you all to focus on and really understand, is that usually this coping behavior is the thing that your spouse points toward and says, if you would just change that, I wouldn't feel the way that I do. Things would be a lot better for me. If you weren't being so defensive and acting arrogant, and if you wouldn't blame me, and if you wouldn't be whiny or needy, then I would be okay. And Matt, you might be saying, if you would just stop that performance stuff and tell me how you feel, instead of and then acting all this whiny, needy, and then carrying something internal that I don't even know about in terms of assigning blame, we would be a lot better. I wouldn't feel that way. We tend to concentrate on each other's coping mechanisms when we, in actuality, need to be concentrating on the central issues that drive that coping behavior. Does that make sense? Yes, because this is the thing that drives this. When Matt is acting defensive and arrogant toward you, how do you feel about yourself?
Like I haven't measured up, I'm discouraged, defected.
Yeah, exactly. You see, what Matt does to cope, and this is true, we haven't found a couple that this isn't true with. The very thing that Matt does to cope with his feelings are the things like a hammer hitting that hot button over and over and over again on Amy that makes her feel like she's defective, that she's discouraged, that she doesn't measure up. And then when you find that Amy closes off from you, gets really busy with the performance, and she gets whiny and needy, what does that do for you?
Mm-hmm. Makes me defensive and arrogant.
Makes you feel inadequate.
Yeah, disrespected, devalued.
Yeah, it's easy to say, well, I just respond this way, but usually what the feelings are that are going on inside of you is that, well, if she closes off and just tries to handle it herself, or she's going through internal processes of blaming that you don't know about, it's easy for you to feel like, well, I'm not important. I'm disrespected, which leads you into this kind of behavior, which stimulates the hot button of Amy, which leads her to this kind of behavior, which stimulates the hot button. Yeah. Thus you have the phraseology, the pain cycle. This is what the pain cycle is about. This is what we want y'all to identify, each couple in the group to identify what that pain cycle is all about.
And just catch this as we're wrapping up this session. A lot of people will say, well, I'll just get rid of Amy and then nobody will be pushing my buttons anymore. But second marriages fail at a higher rate than first, and third marriages fail at a higher rate than second, because you're going to bring your stuff with you into that next marriage, whether you get rid of that person or not. Your stuff's going with you. The junk goes with you. And the opportunity you have now is to identify it, identify the pain cycle, and now we're going to move you into talking about, we don't want you to stay here. Nobody would want to stay here. We want to help you figure out what's the opposite of this. What's the peace cycle that's opposite this pain? But start here. Make sure you get this down on paper, and then we'll take you out of this in the weeks to come. Matt and Amy just did a fantastic job of being vulnerable enough to let us understand what their pain cycle looked like, what their hot buttons are, and how they cope to protect themselves, and then how that affects their spouse in the relationship, and it produces that cycle that they don't want to be in. You're going to get a chance now there in the room to go through the exercises that you've already worked out in the book and actually get it up on the board. It's hard to see your stuff up there in black and white with the rest of the group looking, but it's going to be worth it. So walk through the process and see if you can't get through everybody's pain cycle by the end of your meeting time.
Yeah, we don't want to scare you. It's just me that has to do it, not you. Woo, I hope some of this stuff is starting to make a little bit more sense. And I will just say, I love my job, and I am super comfortable sitting in a room hearing really hard stuff from people's lives. And I am very intimidated to stand up in front of a group of people and share really hard things about my life. So please bear with me, because it is harder being on the flip side of this. But my hope tonight in just giving another example of where this pain came from, I think it helps to kind of hear the way that people get to where they are and where the pain starts. So I want to share some of that. I'm also going to say my lovely husband is not here, and I am sharing none of his pain. So I am completely leaving Silas out of the picture. I'm only going to talk about my own stuff. His stuff is his stuff. So you're only going to get half of my pain cycle, but my hope in sharing it is just so that you can kind of understand where do these things come from that we bring into our marriage, and then what does it look like when we bring it into our marriage, and what do we do with it? And he gets the joy of being married to a therapist, so we have been working on this for a very long time, and a lot of these tools have been very helpful. So I just want to start off by saying that to love and honor your spouse well, it really helps to know the version of them that existed before you ever met. And so just really think about that. To love your spouse well, you've got to know the version of them that existed before you ever came into the picture. And I think sometimes we forget that there is this whole other person that we don't know, or that we did not experience in life. And so my question is, how well do you know each other? How well do you really know your spouse? How well do you know their story and their background and the pain that they bring into situations? So tonight I'm going to share mine with you. I hope that it helps you understand, just by hearing some of my childhood experiences, what shaped me, and that it helps you understand how you get your own pain cycle down on paper, how it kind of plays into what's going on in your own marriage. And we don't want to just keep leaving you hanging with the pain. The hope is coming. There is peace. There is the whole resolution piece to this. So this will be our last night of pain. So keep coming back. Tomorrow or next time will be peace. So we're going to get to the good stuff. So maybe this will be the last kind of hard night. So I'm going to start by saying I hate Mickey Mouse. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but I have had a massive aversion to Disney my entire life. And I never really understood why until I sat down and started working on my pain cycle. And it dawned on me, Mickey Mouse is part of my pain cycle, which is why I hate him. So it gave me some clarity over things in my own life, just doing this practice. But a lot of my pain happened probably between the ages of 8. I put 8 and 15, most of it probably 8 to 12, and then things kind of lingered. But I'm going to share 3 kind of big life events that occurred in my childhood that have shaped a whole lot of what goes on in our life current day, and then kind of how we deal with it. We've done a lot of work. Once again, being married to a therapist is not always fun. So poor Silas had to do a lot of work, and we've come a long way. But just messaging and things that you've experienced from a long time ago really, they get deeply rooted in who you are, and that comes out in lots of different ways. So some of you know me, some of you don't. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm the middle of 3 daughters, and I was raised by both of my parents. And my early childhood years were very magical. I lived a very blessed life. I went to a private school. We were very active in church. Vacations in Destin. I did go to Disney World as a child. And so we just had a very normal life, very blessed life, and everything was great until the day that it wasn't. And so my dad was a house builder, and when the market crashed in the 80s, we got caught up in all of that, and we went bankrupt. And it wasn't the nice, light and fluffy kind of bankrupt. It was like the lose everything kind of bankrupt. And so it was a moment that was like a before and an after. We were fine and okay, and then we weren't fine and okay. And as an 8-year-old, that was very confusing. It was very scary. And so we lost everything. We lost our house, our cars, our jobs, and our life. And they packed us all up and moved us to Albuquerque, New Mexico, on the other side of the country, away from everything and everybody. And I didn't really understand why. I was 8, did not really understand what was happening. But it was terrifying. And so from that kind of life event, I got this message that stability is an illusion, that anything can be taken away from you at any moment, that you are not safe, that kind of financial disaster just happens out of the blue, and it's terrifying because I had no control over any of that. I didn't know it was coming. I wasn't part of the adult world, and so it just happened. So I got that core belief that disaster just going to get you, and the pain that caused for me was feeling very powerless and out of control. Hard thing number 1. So we moved all the way to New Mexico and rented this tiny little house, and it had neon green and orange shag carpet, and I shared this teeny tiny little bedroom with my sister that had, you guessed it, Mickey Mouse wallpaper. And so it has dawned on me that I don't like him because I went to bed every night for 2 years staring at him. At what was the saddest part of my childhood in my life. So Mickey is not a happy thing for me, but now people understand because usually they're horrified when I say, I don't like Mickey Mouse. So at age 9, I found myself starting a brand new school in a place that I didn't know, in a very unfamiliar world. In case anybody is not aware, New Mexico is nothing like Nashville. It is very strange and odd and different. And moving and doing all of these new things are hard for any kid. But the toll of the bankruptcy was really, really hard on my parents, and especially my mom. And so she became very depressed. She did not get out of bed for a very long time. Sorry if I cry. Sorry. Okay, I can do this. So, came from Nashville, went to the country club, went on vacations, all this stuff. My dad became a Pizza Hut delivery man. That was the job that he could find. So he made $15,000 for the year. That's what we had to live on. And so we ate out of the church pantry. We had people give us things. We ate lots of leftover pizza. They messed up on at work, and he would bring home. You don't like pizza after a while when you have to eat it all the time. And the church really helped us out. They helped us pay our bills. They helped us with Christmas. It was really important to have the church at that time, but it was also really hard. And I remember walking home one day in the rain, and I had holes in my shoes, and I was so upset that my socks were wet, but we couldn't buy new shoes, and it was just really sad, and it was really hard. And with my mom being depressed, and my dad working all the time, trying to figure things out. My older sister was 12. She also became very depressed. And so the pain from this point in my life was just I was alone, you know. I felt alone. I felt like nobody was going to help me, that nobody understood. And I really learned you just have to be independent, that you got to figure it out by yourself, because you can't depend on some people. I'm going to be okay. I promise. I'm going to get through this. Okay, so then 2 years later, we moved to Fort Worth. Off we go to Texas. So moved again, going into 5th grade. And while things had improved for our family financially, Dad got a better job. He was working. My older sister was mad at my parents because they ruined her life by moving her across the world. We moved when she was 12, so it was kind of right in that preteen years, and she was very, very upset. So she decided to punish my parents and make them pay for what they had done to her. And so she just kind of set off on a bad path, making a lot of bad choices. She was in trouble all the time, a lot of times in trouble with the law. She was always grounded for months on end. My home life was not fun. This just created a lot of conflict and drama. And so this ended with her becoming pregnant at the age of 16. She dropped out of school to have her baby. And I was really embarrassed. It was kind of hard being the new kid in a new place, having everyone know that this was my sister, having all these hard things going on at home, and still not feeling really connected to my friends or new people in this place. My parents were having a hard time trying to deal with her. And so I just learned a lot and grew up really fast. I was 12 when she had her baby. And so kind of the message at this time with my parents, just either directly to me or indirectly, was really, we're tired, this is hard, don't you screw up too. So I really got the messaging not to mess up. I needed to be perfect. Don't add any stress to us by causing any more trouble, and that there's no room for mistakes. And so the pain that came from that was an intense fear of failure. I cannot screw up. I cannot mess anything up. Or if I did make a mistake, a lot of internal shame that I am failing. There we go. Look at it up there on that big board. Yuck. It's awful. It's hard to talk about. So, my entire life, I have felt powerless and out of control. I have felt alone and trying really hard not to be a failure. So how did I learn to cope? I reacted with this. All these are words on your paper, so I picked all the words from there. I got really good at controlling things. I got really good at being a perfectionist and keeping everything in order and trying to manage the chaos and the stress, and took a lot of that on myself. And when you're trying to manage everything, you get real critical. It's real easy to lecture or to point out what people are not doing well or what's going wrong. And then there's always that kind of internal, I can't do this good enough. Just no matter how well I try to manage life, it's probably never good enough because things are never perfect. And so that's a hard thing. We're going to get to the good stuff, I promise. So that brings us to present day. And how does this show up in my marriage? Poor Silas did not know what he was marrying when he got me. And he has done a very, very good job. I am married to a wonderful man. He was raised by wonderful people, and he is precious, and he has done a very good job with me. But he did not cause any of this pain. This was all before he came into my life. So here's how these things show up. If we get a random bill in the mail, I freak out. We're going bankrupt. We're going to lose everything. It's going to be a disaster. And, well, thank you. So on the surface, he sees the behavior, right? You're just overreacting. It's just $50. It's not a big deal. It's real easy to say things like that, right? So if he did not know, but Silas knows my pain, he knows my story, he knows where I came from, so he does not say those things to me. He recognizes, I know what her fear is, I know what she came from, and he is able to be reassuring and kind. And so we always have the surface level, what we're seeing and how people react, but there's always that underneath of where is it coming from. My house being messy. I live in a house with 4 boys. It's always messy. And I'm kind of a control neat freak. Causes me some stress. Feels a little chaotic and a little out of control. Mom can get a little critical or lectury or upset, but my boys are all very precious with me and patient with me, and they know where it's from and what causes it, and so I'm aware that it is my issue and that they did not cause all of that stress, so it's things I've got to work on and then things that they give me a lot of grace for as well. If Silas gets busy with work or if he just can't talk as much during the day, it can trigger that I feel alone, I feel a little bit disconnected, and I can get into that, I just do this myself, or I don't need you. You know, we can get very defensive sometimes. Last one, so if I'm asked to do something new, like stand up in front of a big old group of people and talk about fear of failure, right? Not wanting to try new things, not wanting to do new things. It's scary, it's hard. But I have learned over the years to try that it's okay to fail. I don't have to be perfect. We can still get up and try to do some things. But it's a battle. It's a hard thing to do. And so those are just a few examples, but in each of these moments, Silas has the opportunity to react based on my behavior and what's happening in that moment, or to respond from a place of humility and kindness, because he knows my childhood hurts and what I'm really struggling with under the surface. Believe me, we don't always get this right in our marriage. We get sideways a lot. But he is patient and he is kind, and we've worked really hard to communicate and to recognize opportunities to love each other well in these messy and very painful parts of life. Silas did not create or cause any of my original pain, but he is the one that gets to deal with it when I get upset. We are still a work in progress, and Silas definitely does a better job at responding well in the hard moments than I do. He's precious. Marriage is hard, but it is so much easier to be married to a person that knows you really well. So my encouragement in sharing all of this is to know your spouse's story, to know where they came from, to know their hurt, to know what they need, because we can love each other really, really well when we know each other really well. And this was harder than I thought it was going to be, so thank you for being very patient with me. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Wow, that's a big deal, right? It's a big deal. Good job. Proud of you. I might cry. Being therapists in the same office, we get to know each other pretty well, so I know Lauren's story, and so we try to just be supportive when it comes out, right? And she knows mine. I'm not going to give you all mine tonight, but she knows mine. I think a couple of things that I want to say about the video before we wrap up, because we just have a couple minutes left. I was making some notes, and I was thinking, okay, what do I want you guys to know about kind of in general why this was so important? The purpose of even going through this process, defining your own pain cycle, is awareness. We've got to be aware of ourselves. How can our spouse ever be aware of our pain cycle if we're not aware of it? And so I think this is a really good process for everybody to go through, to really think about, where does my pain come from and how does it show up in my relationships? Marriage relationships, with your own parents, with your children, can show up anywhere. So that's why it's really just so important, because we need to understand ourselves first. The other thing I wrote down was, we're going to laugh at this. Sometimes your partner can see your pain cycle more clearly than their own. Warning, be very careful that you don't too quickly or harshly point that out. Because if you're like me, as I'm thinking about pain cycle, I know my husband's front to back. I know exactly what his pain is and how he gets activated and what he does. But that's not my job. My job is to look at my own pain cycle. So sometimes if you guys are having conversation with each other, just be gentle with pointing out maybe what you see in them that they may not see in themselves. We want to be helpful, but we don't want to be too harsh with that. So anybody have any questions or any comments they want to make about tonight, what they think or feel about this whole thing? You don't have to get real deep, but anybody want to say anything? So we're not going to have any process questions tonight because we're about out of time. But again, I want to thank Lauren for being so vulnerable with you guys tonight. And so next week, the good stuff comes, right? How do we move from this pain cycle that we are understanding about ourselves to a peace cycle, being able to address this internally and kind of turn it around for each other and with each other. So that's next week, so please come back and join us. And Kent is going to pray us out. So do you want this?